Democrats like Representative Vincent Dixie pushed back.
Oh, this doesn't feel much like a partnership. It feels like a dictatorship as usual.
Music City Center funding was on the chopping block, but that bill's been postponed, at least this year. Right now in Nashville, a teenager is accused of raping a man in a public restroom. 18-year-old Kewan Wilson was 17 at the time. A 25-year-old man was followed into a restroom on Edge Hill Avenue, raped and robbed. That was on October 19th. Well, detectives say they followed a car Wilson was riding in and took him into custody at his home. He was free on bond from a January sex crimes arrest when they caught him. Californians haven't seen anything like it since 1983, a tornado in L.A.
Just the first instinct was just to get into some hiding spots, and restroom was the closest one.
Yeah, that's Ross Garcia. Says he's inside a building that got damaged by what the National Weather Service confirms was an EF1 tornado yesterday morning, on the ground for 2 to 3 minutes with a peak wind speed of 110 miles per hour. Market Numbers Report brought to you by Beacon Capital Management, beaconcm.com. Here's Derry Albinger.
Stocks plunged heading into the close on the latest news from the Federal Reserve. The Dow closed down 530 points, the Nasdaq fell 190, and the S&P gave up 66, all three indices off more than 1.5%. Some economists had predicted the Fed would pause its interest rate hikes due to the banking crisis, while others said the central bank would move ahead with a half-point increase. Instead, the Fed raising interest rates 0.25%, indicating that inflation is still too high, but also acknowledging that it will keep the banking sector's health in mind in the months to come. TikTok is ramping up a public relations campaign to fend off the possibility of a nationwide ban by the Biden administration. Dozens of TikTok creators were on Capitol Hill lobbying in favor of the platform a day before the CEO of the company is set to testify before lawmakers.
Well, futures are up before the opening bell this morning. Dow futures up 61, S&P 18, Nasdaq 124. That's the latest news. Traffic and weather next. I'm Ken Weaver, WTN News.
Nashville's Morning News with Dan Mandis.
And so, my fellow Americans,
We talk news. SuperTalk 99.7 WTN.
5:06 on Nashville's Morning News on SuperTalk 99.7 WTN. Good morning to you, friends. Action-packed show today. By the way, good morning to Johnny B. and Ken Weaver. 6:35, Senator Bill Hagerty is going to be joining us. President Biden actually signed a piece of his legislation, believe it or not. So we'll talk about that with the senator. Also, his take on those failed banks. 7:35, Congressman Scott Desjardins on the future of nuclear energy, among other things. And at 8:05, Hans von Spakovsky from the Heritage Foundation. He'll be telling us about all things regarding the southern border and illegal immigration. Just a lot of news going on this morning. Blaring headline from the Daily Mail: is this the smoking gun? Of course, it relates to the possible imminent or maybe not so imminent arrest of former President Donald Trump. Now, there's a letter, apparently they say, from Michael Cohen or his attorney claiming that Donald Trump did not reimburse him for that hush money to Stormy Daniels. Now, what that tells you is that Michael Cohen used his own money and perhaps acted on his own when he paid that $130,000 to Stormy Daniels. So that is a major, major revelation. The big question is that why the grand jury was canceled yesterday? Now, they have been ordered back today, this afternoon. They're in New York, so we'll keep an eye on that. The proceedings canceled. Nobody really knows why they were canceled. Maybe it was because of this letter that came out at some point yesterday. It's been a crazy week. I mean, we heard from Donald Trump's fixer, of course, Michael Cohen. He's been making all of these various media appearances. Now, prosecutors have actually told Michael Cohen, will you shut up already? Enough with the appearances on MSNBC. Enough with the appearances on podcasts. Enough with the appearances on CNN. Stop talking. So that's what the prosecutors have been telling Michael Cohen, because it is obvious when you see him in interviews that he does have a white-hot hatred for the former president. We also heard from Bob Costello, played all kinds of audio yesterday, the guy who used to work with Michael Cohen, who said the guy is a serial liar. And he hates Donald Trump to the point to where he would say anything, not only to damage Donald Trump, but to also stay out of prison. So there is just a lot of players. There's a lot of news, and especially the situation with what the Daily Mail is calling the smoking gun. Again, this letter saying that Michael Cohen, his attorney, claiming Donald Trump failed to reimburse him for that hush money to Stormy Daniels. And again, this does tell you that Cohen used his own money and perhaps acted on his own. This is what the Daily Mail reports. This was an exclusive yesterday. It's all over the place now this morning. Michael Cohen claimed he was not reimbursed by Donald Trump or his organization for hush money payments to porn actress Stormy Daniels in a 2018 letter to federal authorities, contradicting his recent grand jury testimony. What have I been telling you? The man is a serial liar, and he has motivation to lie. That motivation is to get Donald Trump and, of course, stay out of prison. So this is a situation that is constantly developing. They say the bombshell document exclusively obtained by the Daily Mail could throw a wrench into the works of prosecutors pursuing criminal charges against Donald Trump over those payments. The letter appears to be in direct conflict with Cohen's sworn testimony to Congress given a year later in 2019. Cohen said under oath that Donald Trump asked me to pay off an adult film star with whom he had an affair. Again, not to belabor the point, but I will say for probably a third time, the man is literally a slimeball attorney and a professional liar. So now what's next? I mean, if this truly is a smoking gun, then what do you do with this grand jury? By the way, there's all kinds of stories. I told you about this yesterday, that people within Bragg's office, and you also have prosecutors all across Manhattan, they're saying now, that are telling Alvin Bragg, dude, you are wrong. You are simply not going to be able to get a prosecution here. And so there's absolute chaos in the Manhattan DA's office. And that is why Jim Jordan is now going after Alvin Bragg. And there's a lot to talk about here, because one of the things that you look at is, of course, what we've all been talking about, and that is the politicization of the Justice Department. And so Jim Jordan, of course, was on Hannity last night, and they were talking about these two attorneys that used to work in Alvin Bragg's office, a guy by the name of Mark Pomeranz and another person, Carrie Dunn, who actually quit Bragg's office and started a pressure campaign to get this grand jury investigation going. And now the news on this is Jim Jordan. He is, of course, you know, chair of the House Judiciary Committee. He said on Fox News last night that he is now investigating that Manhattan DA, Alvin Bragg, and his unprecedented abuse and politically motivated probe of Donald Trump. And so, you know, he's asking the question, why now is this investigation underway?
What changed? We know the Department of Justice wasn't going to bring the case. As you said, the previous district attorney, Mr. Vance, wasn't going to bring the case. When Alvin Bragg gets elected as district attorney, he's not going to bring the case. And then the only thing that changes between then and now is President Trump announces he's running for president. And most importantly, I think, Pomeranz and Dunn, these two individuals who worked as assistants, resign, start pitching a fit, start protesting, write a book, and create this pressure on Alvin Bragg from the left. And suddenly he decides, oh, now I'm going to indict President Trump. I think that's the key thing. And so that's why we're sending letters to Mr. Pomeranz, Mr. Dunn, and we want them to come in for a transcribed interview so we can ask them some important questions.
What about bringing in Bragg?
Yeah, and that is a great question by Sean Hannity. What about bringing in Bragg? And he basically, Jim Jordan said basically, you know what? He is supposed to at some point respond to Jordan's office today. So now you do have Jim Jordan demanding all these documents and testimony from those two, in addition to the DA, Alvin Bragg. He says this whole thing, and he's absolutely right, is about a weaponized Justice Department who seem hell-bent on not only going after Donald Trump, but conservatives across the country as well. I've got that audio for you. It is 5:15, and it's coming up next, right after we check the roads from the Paul Winkler Investment WTN Traffic Center. Thank you, Jack. Today, partly sunny, a high of 78. Right now, 62 degrees at SuperTalk 99.7 WTN. All kinds of things going on in New York, and the perhaps imminent, maybe not so imminent arrest of former President Donald Trump. And I'm playing audio for you from Jim Jordan. And there's a lot going on, of course, as everyone knows, with the weaponization of the Justice Department, and this has long been a conversation. He was on with Sean Hannity last night, and he was talking about not only the Justice Department, you know, progressives there within that department going after not only former President Trump, but also everyday Americans.
It sure seems like it because, I mean, think about President Trump. First it was Russia. Then it was the phone call with Zelensky that the Democrats go after him. Then it's his tax returns. Then it's his business. Then it's his children's business ties. And then it's the raid on his home, for goodness sake. And now possibly this. So, yeah, we see it with President Trump, but maybe just as importantly, or as important, is the fact that they've went after parents, they went after pro-lifers, they've went after traditional Catholics they said were domestic terrorists. They had that memorandum that we learned about 6 weeks ago. So that is the concern that you see from so many of these agencies in the Biden administration actually being turned on the American people that they're supposed to be serving.
I mean, listen, somebody please tell me where he's wrong. I mean, I had a big old monologue yesterday on all of the different investigations into the former president, then President Donald Trump, and about how so many of them turned out to be absolutely nothing. And now remember, these investigations are part of what Republicans campaigned on during the midterm elections in 2022. People are worried about the Justice Department and other agencies and how they have become so incredibly politicized. So if this is something where you want to bring awareness to this politicization, the more we can solve the issue. You have to be able to talk about, address, and talk about the issue, and then figure out a way to solve the issue. And by the way, one more audio bite from Jim Jordan. He says that, yes, one way that they can solve this problem is to defund those agencies until they can figure out a way to solve that issue.
This attack on the First Amendment, this selective prosecution, this going after President Trump, it is all wrong, and that's what the Judiciary Committee is focused on, making sure we get the facts on the table so we can propose the legislation to remedy the situation, and if we have to, use the appropriation process, use the power of the purse to limit funds going to some of these agencies that are doing this kind of thing.
Yeah, that again is Jim Jordan on Fox News last night. This is from the New York Post. Headline, chaos at court as Trump grand jury hearing canceled. Bragg is concerned about an indictment. What have we been telling you about here on Nashville's Morning News for the last several days, at least all this week, is that Bragg, simply put, does not have a case. And then when you put into the equation the fact that there's now this letter that has come out that basically, again, is from Michael Cohen's attorney saying that Donald Trump did not reimburse him for that hush money to Stormy Daniels. Well, that really actually backs up what Trump has been saying all along and his attorneys, that Michael Cohen acted on his own, used his own money, and Donald Trump never told him to make those payments. And again, Michael Cohen, slimeball attorney. The Manhattan grand jury hearing evidence against former President Donald Trump in the Stormy Daniels, quote, hush money case did not reconvene on Wednesday as scheduled. Court officials telling the New York Post there is absolute chaos in Alvin Bragg's office. They are, by the way, supposed to reconvene today. Now, one of the things that they're talking about is the fact that Alvin Bragg now, because think about the position that he's in. He was pressured to start this investigation. Now he's being told that he really doesn't have a case by many, many, many people within Manhattan, the DA's office, his office, and so forth. And so you've got a situation for Alvin Bragg where he simply put cannot win. It is 5:20 on Nashville's Morning News, and it looks like he may ultimately have to drop the case. We'll have to wait and see what happens. That's what some people are saying. And oh, can you imagine if he does end up having to drop the case, or the grand jury comes back and they say, no, there's simply put not enough here, especially when you look at the fact that this is a grand jury in Manhattan, where you got Manhattan filled with a whole bunch of progressives. I've got a little bit more on this story. And also coming up right before the news, have you heard what the Biden administration is doing with some of these illegals coming across our northern border? That story straight ahead, 5:20 on Nashville's Morning News on SuperTalk 99.7 WTN.
The Drive with Brian Wilson.
I'm telling you, folks,